The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is Music Mondays on the Nerdcast Empire. It's our brand new weekly music show that we bring you each and every Monday. We highlight the best of the new releases in rock and heavy metal. We'll be talking about some of the releases from the vault as we go back in our archives, try to find some of our favorite albums of all time. And we'll be keeping you up to date on all the latest news from the world of rock. I am Matt in the studio once again, joined once again this week by Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Another amazing week in the Empire. No complaints.
Yeah, really excited to continue to bring new content to our listeners. And this is our first of our weekly sessions on music. We'll be bringing you this episode every Monday on the Nerdcast Empire. We're going to start off with new releases, and this week we're going to be talking about the releases as of February the 2nd, so that week of February the 2nd. And one thing we'll mention off the top, we talk about these releases, and the one thing about new music nowadays is release dates are kind of fluid because sometimes you see albums available on the band's website earlier than release date. Sometimes you'll see tracks available before the album comes out. So we're going to do our best to kind of base off the information that we have, but you may see, in fact, one of the artists we're going to talk about today, their website and Wikipedia lists the album coming out in March, but the tracks are already available. You can already buy the album from the artist. So in that case, we're going to go ahead and keep it on the date of February the 2nd. And we're going to be starting off with Mike. And Mike, as always, you compiled a wonderful list of the new releases, and we'll try to link to that list in our YouTube version of the podcast. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see a card pop up probably about now that will allow you to link to where Mike has posted all the videos. And this includes videos we did not choose for these four best of the week. So you'll get a chance to make your own decisions, but we encourage you to check out what we think are the four best. And Mike, you're going to start with your two best. So what on your list this week made the cut and found the way into your best of the week?
Yeah, a lot of variety on this week's list. It was different for sure, and that's always good. You're looking for something new, something that you haven't heard before. And for my first pick, I'm going with the band Being as an Ocean with their newest album, Death Can Wait.
Yeah, talk about different. This was definitely different. Band considered post-hardcore, which there's so many band labels out there. I'm not sure what some of these even mean, but a really interesting group with a very different sound.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of times anytime they throw the term post and then some genre or something afterwards, from what I gather, it just tends to mean that they add new elements to that sound that wouldn't typically be like something like post-hardcore. You get kind of the screamy vocals, but in this case, you also get a lot of melody. I was looking up, Wikipedia also mentioned them being a post-rock band, which I thought was funny because pretty much everything can fall under the label of rock for the most part. So in Wikipedia's explanation for post-rock mentioned that typically those kind of bands have rock instrumentation along with electronics. So, all right.
Yeah, I mean, whatever works as far as that goes, certainly. And this is a group that you mentioned. There's some melodic tones. Obviously, the song that we had on your playlist, there were melodic tones to the song, but there was also that screaming vocal type. But it was really a very good mix of those two. So I think even if that's not really your cup of tea, I don't think it's going to be so much of that it's going to keep you from enjoying the song.
Yeah, I'm really a fan of any band that can find a good balance between the two. I think melody always has a place, as does harmony. If you can mix that with some of the more extreme vocals and do it well, then it's probably going to get my attention. Interesting thing about this band is they started out under the name Vanguard playing extreme Christian metal back in 2011. And some of their early demos actually were posted on their MySpace page. I found that to be just kind of a moment in time that sadly we don't have any longer.
I think the hardest part about these type of projects that we've been doing is trying to remember when things actually existed, because it's weird to think that something in 2011 would have been posted to MySpace. To me, in my brain,
that would have had to have been the tail end, right?
I would think so, because it feels like that was going away at that point. But again, that's what MySpace was kind of known for, was having music. I mean, It was very much the music social media. So I guess it's not really surprising that, and I think you've seen Bandcamp kind of replace that part of MySpace when it went away, but I guess it's not surprising that that's how they got their start.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a list of bands from probably 2004 to 2010 or so that probably owe a lot of their being discovered to MySpace. Obviously not so much anymore, but you're right. Bandcamp is kind of now that hub of here's our music. We can give it to you here. And, you know, as we've discovered, getting product out to consumers is getting easier and easier no matter what level you're doing this at. So it's really cool. And obviously with what we're doing here now, looking up bands that we probably wouldn't have found otherwise, even with MySpace, because I'm not going to just stumble into, you know, random post-hardcore bands.
I think that's where the challenge lies now. It's like the stuff's out there. It's just a matter of how do you get it in front of people so they know where to go find it. And that's kind of what this podcast is meant for, is to try to find some bands that maybe you're not familiar with and put them out there in front of you. And hopefully you'll find some of your new favorite music like this one here.
Yeah. And for this album, Death Can Wait, a couple of the tracks that I would say being standout that you should check out are the title track itself, Death Can Wait, Give It a Voice So My Heart Could Speak, and Gloom. The whole album top to bottom is worth a listen, but those are a few of the tracks that really, really stood out to me.
Yeah, this was definitely one of the ones on your list that I would have chose. We will try over the weeks to pick different artists just so that we give everybody a full variety, but I was a little concerned when I saw the font of their band name at the beginning of the video. It was a little old English.
At least it was legible.
It was.
That's a start.
It was. That gave me some hope, and it was really good. I definitely recommend checking that one out. So you have two new picks. So what is pick number 2?
The other one definitely sounds considerably different than the first. It is a side project of the founder and guitarist of Yawning Man, a man by the name of Gary Arce, I believe. And this group is called Big Scenic Nowhere, with their most recent effort, The Way Down.
This was interesting to me because this sounded like something out of the late 90s, early 2000s. And I'm sure something you'll talk about is it feels very Alice in Chains inspired, with maybe a little bit of tantric in there as well out of the vocals. Really, really interesting. I really enjoyed this song.
Yeah, the vocal harmony definitely has a lot of that post-grunge and grunge influence, especially like Alice in Chains and bands like that. Musically speaking, they were definitely sludgy, more stoner metal sounding than I think Alice in Chains ever was. And not surprising when you hear that this group is basically just a side project where people are getting together kind of on the fly. Their Bandcamp page basically says most of the songs go back to 2021, some from 2020, even back as far as 2018, where, you know, this guy, the two main contributors, I believe, Arce and Bob Balch from Fu Manchu, just kind of get together with other people as they can and throw these songs together. So it's definitely kind of garage rock in a way, as far as them just kind of jamming out together. Yeah, for an album on the Heavy Psych Sounds record label, it certainly fits with that kind of experimental, psychedelic, stoner rock vibe.
Yeah, and I think when you mentioned that they just kind of get together with people, it explains why when you look at their Wikipedia page, you see all these past collaborators and you think, oh man, these guys must be difficult to work with. And it's not really that case. It's just a matter of, here are the people who are available at this time. So we're just going to get these guys together and this is where we're going to make music. So it kind of tells you that in a way, it's actually more encouraging that clearly a lot of people want to collaborate with these guys when they get the time to get together. And it definitely can create some interesting sounds when you're pulling people from so many different places to try to put something together like this album, and you can end up with some interesting influences.
Absolutely. And for this album, some of the tracks that I really thought stood out were the title track again, The Way Down, Bleed On, and then their cover of a Hall & Oates song, Sarah Smile, which, speaking to collaborations, features the keyboardist from Hall & Oates.
No, he's not going to be playing with Hall & Oates anytime soon.
No, he is not.
After their breakup. We will not be talking about that in our news segment coming up after the break, but it's good to see him get a chance to play on that. Sarah Smile's a good one from Hall & Oates, who has a lot of really good music and really kind of fits. When you hear the sound of that band, it's like, oh, I could see them covering Hall & Oates. That makes a lot of sense.
Really, really tremendous cover. I would recommend it.
Really good second choice as well this week on your new music from February 2nd. I picked a couple as well from your list. Really interesting groups, completely divergent as far as where they're coming from. But the first one won the spotlight is a band called Mean Streak, the Blood Moon EP. You can listen to Giant Speaks off of that album on YouTube. One of the first all-female thrash bands in metal history. It's very interesting. They were formed in 1985. reactivated in 2023. Interesting, 3 members of their band are married to 3 members of Dream Theater, which is kind of different, which is kind of how they got back together, because John Petrucci was starting a solo multi-gig tour, which included Dave LaRue and Mike Portnoy. So Mean Streak opened for them, and that's kind of what got them going again, where they decided to get back in the studio and record an album, and the result is Blood Moon. It's got a great thrash sound. It's going to sound like most of your favorite thrash albums. Sounds really good, really clean. Vocals are great. It's got a good, powerful sound. I would definitely like to hear more from this group. I was really impressed.
Yeah, as was I. And kind of a couple things about this group is I'm kind of curious, considering this band is comprised of the wives of Mike Portnoy, John Petrucci, and John Myung. I wonder how their relationship fared when Portnoy first split from Dream Theater, because I kind of get the impression that Portnoy and Petrucci kind of still stayed friends to some degree, because I feel like they were closer than some of the other members, but that had to be a little strange at the very least. I think even though it's really cool that they're this all-female thrash band, I think when you start considering them to be an all-female thrash band, it's almost like you're trying to add some sort of caveat to them just being a thrash band. And I think that kind of does them a disservice in a way, because when you listen to their music, they just thrash. I mean, it's great stuff, great sound. It's a cool accomplishment to be an all-female band in what's normally such a male-dominated space, but you don't want to use that as like, they're good for an all-female thrash band. Like they're just a good band.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a band I was familiar with until I found this one on your list, and I definitely want to hear more of it. I definitely want to hear the rest of this EP, and certainly, if you're a fan of thrash metal, I think you're going to enjoy this. And I would not be surprised to see some more prog type influences. I mean, you can't have that kind of tie to Dream Theater without some sort of prog leaking in there, which I think would make it even more interesting to have some sort of prog thrash crossover.
It kind of makes you wonder how their tastes differ. Like, are they playing Dream Theater music for their wives and they're just like, what is this nonsense? Like, why don't you guys just rock harder? This is stupid. I also listened to a little bit off of their Roadkill album from '88. Also recommend that. Definitely cool stuff.
That's awesome. Awesome to see them doing what they're doing, getting back in the studio and releasing a really cool new EP. Certainly check that out. Going completely the other direction, it was a band by the name of Myrath or Marath. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Since I don't speak Tunisian, I would not know. The album is called Karma. I listened to the song Heroes off of it. As I mentioned, Tunisian progressive metal band formed in 2001, currently based in Tunisia. It's been noted for a mix of Arabic and Middle Eastern instrumentation with power metal and progressive rock. They consider it Oriental metal. Also, blazing desert metal is what is used, which I love that. They were the first band from Tunisia to be signed to a record label outside of the country. This is one where the album is listed as a March 8th release, but you can get it through their website right now. So definitely encourage it. It just rocks. Like, I never would have thought I'd been listening to a band from Tunisia, but when you listen to it, it's you really wouldn't know where they were from necessarily. They're certainly doing their country proud, and again, very proggy, but it also rocks. So it's just the perfect combination of those, and I definitely want to hear more from this band because they have a very interesting sound.
Yeah, it was interesting to read that their guitarist, Malik Ben Arbia, formed the band when he was 13. I can't imagine being that good at anything at the age of 13, let alone being this tremendous guitar player.
And you wonder, like, obviously somebody forming a band in New York City at the age of 13 or in San Francisco at the age of 13 is one thing, but you're in Tunisia. What is the support like for a 13-year-old that says, I want to be in a metal band?
In a prog power metal act.
Couldn't even imagine what that's like, but really cool. I think any chance we get to spotlight bands that are just kind of off of the beaten path in a different place in the world, I think that's something we can do here. And I like I said, definitely want to hear more from this band. It really had a fun sound.
Yeah, I would have to think the behind the music for them would be certainly worth watching. You mentioned Heroes, Into the Light, Child of Prophecy, a couple other tracks off that album. Really cool as well.
Yeah, definitely going to check out more from Myrath or Marath. I'm not sure which.
Mirath,
possibly.
I don't know.
We'll try to get that figured out and hopefully spotlight more of their music as we go forward. But that's what we got for new music from the February 2nd new release calendar, if you will. We're going to step aside for a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a news headline. Then we're going to go into the vault And we're going to wrap up this first edition of Music Mondays. We'll do that on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, Music Mondays is underway. This is the first episode of our Music Mondays. This is the 32nd overall episode of the Nerdcast Empire. Thank you to everybody who has checked out our website, our podcast, our store, which you can check out at nerdcastempire.com/store. We're getting some orders in. It's wonderful. Everybody seems to be really happy with them. We're not looking to make a ton off of those. We're just looking to get our merch out there, and you can pick up our merch and help support our podcast initiatives. Of course, coming up next week, we're going to be talking WWE Premium Live event, the Elimination Chamber, which will be happening from Perth in Western Australia. It's a very early morning Saturday Premium Live event. We'll be recording a podcast. That'll be our regular Sunday edition. And then we'll be getting into our weekly stuff next week with Music Mondays and then our midweek anime review. So check that out next week on the Nerdcast Empire. We're going to get to some headlines now. And one specific headline you pulled from Blabbermouth that I definitely wanted to bring attention to was a story, some comments from Steve Vai talking about his collaboration in a project that has to do with Jason Becker, who, of course, has been suffering from ALS for a long time, but yet continues to make a huge impact in the music industry. You're kind of let you get into the details of that story and we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And first off, I would recommend everyone just to look up Jason Becker. There was also a documentary made about him a few years back.
Jason Becker, not dead yet.
Not dead yet. I would definitely recommend checking that out. I don't want to say incredible story because it makes it sound like it's all a positive thing, but just the perseverance of the guy is just phenomenal. He's a guy who kind of first burst on the scene with Cacophony, a two-man project with he and Marty Friedman back in the 80s. Two just ridiculously virtuosic guitar playing ability. His story kind of continues on in 1990 when he was signed to join David Lee Roth's band. Around that same time, Marty Friedman joined Megadeth. So, clearly they were moving in the right direction. Not long after recording David Lee Roth's A Little Ain't Enough album, that was when his ALS first started kicking in. And obviously, because of that, he couldn't continue with the band. He had to retire. And, if you know about ALS at all, you know that his physical guitar playing days were behind him. Yet he managed to continue composing music. His father actually helped develop software that would allow him to continue to speak even after he was no longer able to move, just through eye motion. So he's released albums since then using this technology, which is really, really cool. The story in question involves Nita Strauss, another great guitarist, and her manager/drummer/fiance, Josh Vialta. They visited Becker recently just to kind of go through some of his unreleased material. In doing that, they stumbled into the song Some Assembly Required, which was a track written for David Lee Roth but not used.
That's interesting that they're still finding music, obviously, that he had a hand in back in the late 80s, early 90s, and now can actually continue to try to do something with it.
Yeah, and I guess the whole idea is they found this and they wanted to put together something to help benefit his special needs trust. So they enlisted the help of just a ridiculous list of musicians to kind of fill in with guitar work. Ended up making this like a 7.5 minute thing. Also using Jason Becker's original guitar work as well. But you can find the video on the Blabbermouth article. It's really cool. I would definitely check it out. Some of the people involved, you have Chris Broderick, Gus G, Paul Gilbert, Steve Vai, Richie Kotzen, Zach Wilde, Alex Skolnick, Nita Strauss, Jason Becker himself, obviously, Marty Friedman, Herman Lee, Billy Sheehan playing bass. It's just a really tremendous thing.
I mean, it's great to see. Obviously, ALS is something I think if you're maybe not familiar with Jason Becker, but maybe a pro football fan, I think a lot of people remember the story of Steve Gleason, who was a former New Orleans Saint who had to deal with ALS, and kind of in the same vein is using different software to be able to continue to communicate and share his perspective even after his body has kind of let him down. And this is very much in the same vein. And I think it's one of those things that shines a positive light on the rock community because, as we've talked about off the air, Blabbermouth sometimes is just this website full of geriatric former rockers complaining about each other or complaining about other rock bands or whatever it may be. And This is a bunch of guys who were clearly influenced by Jason Becker, or possibly even have had music composed by him, even post ALS, that have found this opportunity to not only do something that will benefit him, but also use actual playing from him, where they can actually pull that stuff out from the early 90s and be able to incorporate it into this track. And yeah, definitely check out the Blabbermouth story on it. Has the full list of artists. It has links to basically everything you would want to know about Jason Becker, but just a really good feel good story about, somebody just overcoming and not willing to just, is the whole not dead yet kind of sums it up. It's like, look, yeah, I realize that I'm in the situation I'm in, but I still have things to contribute to this world and contribute to rock and metal music. And I'm going to continue to do that until I can't do that anymore.
You can also go to the website, jasonbecker.com, and there's information and also a link to a donation page for his trust. Yeah, one of those just really touching stories, because clearly this guy was so way ahead of his time, and to be kind of cut down so early on. A lot of my knowing of him kind of came from Marty Friedman, since I'm a big fan of his. He contributed on Marty Friedman's Inferno album back in 2014, which is definitely worth checking out as well. But yeah, there's so many 70 and 80-year-old guys in bands that just can't get along, and you hear about it all the time. And to me, that's not news. Something like this is newsworthy.
Yeah, and it's great to see the metal community continuing to step up and help its own, and hopefully help other people with ALS, because obviously it's one of those diseases that doesn't have a cure. And really all they can do is try to help treat it as best as possible so you can manage it to some degree. But I think everybody's hopeful that, they continue to donate. And certainly we encourage you, if you have the means, go to Jason Becker's website, donate to the cause. And maybe sometime, and even in our lifetimes, they'll find a breakthrough. Crazy stuff for sure. And I think there's a lot of mystery still about that disease that they're obviously still trying to figure out, and hopefully it'll help them find a cure for it at some point. So switching gears after that very positive news story about people doing good things in the metal community, we're going to go into the vault. And this is where we're going to be suggesting a couple of albums. It could be rock, could be metal. Who knows? It could even be just music that we really liked over the years that might come outside of those genres. And just kind of talking about albums and bands that are important to us that we think you should check out. And let Mike go first and let you go into the vault to have your pick for this week.
Yeah, the Being as an Ocean pick for current music kind of had me thinking about other bands that I enjoy that kind of incorporate both maybe a death metal-ish sound with really good clean vocals. And with that in mind, my vault pick is the band Scar Symmetry with their 2006 album Pitch Black Progress.
Yeah, Scar Symmetry is one that I remember you listening to quite a bit. It's not a band that I've listened to a ton, but I think always appreciated their work. It's maybe a little harder than some of the bands I listen to out of Europe. I think classified more death metal, melodic death metal from Sweden, but a really, really good band that's still around. I believe they've released 7 albums, and this is one of their earlier albums, but certainly one people need to check out.
Yeah, they had a break in between their last 2 albums that was pretty substantial, but thankfully they finally did get around to releasing a new album not too long ago. This one being their second album. The band itself started in 2004, listed as a Swedish melodic death metal band. The main forces in the band presently are guitarist Per Nilsson and the drummer Henrik Olsen. If you look at their credits on a lot of their more recent albums, Per Nilsson seems to be the one writing the music, with Olsen handling lyric duty. Back then, they also had a lead singer by the name of Christian Alstom, who was a phenomenal lead singer. Check him out. Check out his solo work even, and as well as some of his other bands that he's been in, including Solution 45. Really good lyrical or very good vocals. The dude can handle both kind of the death growling and just amazing clean vocals simultaneously. It's really impressive. So much so that when he left the band, they actually had to bring in 2 lead singers to replace him. Robert Carlson, who handles the growls and clean backing vocals, and Lars Palmquist, who does clean vocals and backing growls, according to Wikipedia, which is kind of funny. I first encountered this album, I think, back on the old Music Choice Metal channel with the song The Illusionist, and just the way it transitioned from the growls to the clean chorus just blew my mind, and I've been a fan ever since.
think that's one of those things that it's hard for bands to get it right, because you can certainly get it wrong, and it can be a song that people who like clean vocals and people who like growling vocals, neither one of them like. I think you really have to be good at it to find that balance that basically gives you something that everybody's going to like. I think Scar Symmetry, one of the earlier bands that kind of found that right balance between those two and allowed them to have a lot of success.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a European thing or a Swedish thing, but there's always that weird fascination with melody where even if something is really rough and dark, the clouds break and they have this like really ear-pleasing melody, whether it be through the guitars or the vocals. And these guys do it here. I would definitely check out the title track, Pitch Black Progress, The Illusionist, like I mentioned. A song called Calculate the Apocalypse and Oscillation Point. Just first off, ridiculous titles, but really cool songs.
Ridiculous titles is almost par for the course for those European metal bands. Like, the more ridiculous you can make it sound, the better. And they certainly did that. But yeah, I mean, really good group. Definitely worth checking out. Obviously, check out all their stuff, but the Pitch Black Progress from the mid 2000s decade, certainly worth checking out for sure. So we'll move into my vault pick, and I went a completely different direction. Obviously I could easily go with European metal, and I will certainly have my picks from that genre at some point, but continuing on with just albums in general that were influential to my being a music fan, went with Billy Joel this week, which is totally different than everything else we've had on the show so far. And his album Glass Houses, which was released March 12th of 1980, it was his 7th studio album. It features his first #1 song, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me. The album topped the pop charts for 6 weeks, ranked #4 on Billboard's 1980 year-end album chart. It sold about 7.1 million copies in the U.S. It won him a Grammy for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance. The critics kind of said it was a little harder edged than some of his stuff in the late 70s in response to the punk and new wave movements, which was interesting. But I think the main track, side 1, I think is where most of the familiar songs are going to come from for people who may be more casual, like You May Be Right. Sometimes a Fantasy, Don't Ask Me Why, Still Rock and Roll to Me, and All for Lena. Side 2's got some good stuff, though. I Don't Want to Be Alone, Sleeping with the Television On, Closer to the Borderline. Those are all really good songs. I think All for Lena is probably my favorite song on that album. Definitely a little harder rocking song than some of the other ones on there. Obviously, some of them are a little more poppy, but it's just a really well-rounded album. Kind of leads into what Billy Joel gets into in the early 80s. It's a little heavier, a little darker. Obviously, as he kind of goes through the ups and downs of his personal life that happened, where he basically got ripped off by a family member and had some relationship issues, and some of his songs start getting a little bit darker as you get into the early 80s. But I've always appreciated Billy Joel, and Glass Houses is one of those albums that I can listen to basically beginning to end and enjoy all the music on there. I think it's one of his best.
It's an interesting case because I feel like with Billy Joel, a lot of times it isn't the biggest hits of his that I enjoy the most. It's like, it's weird to me that It's Still Rock and Roll to Me was like the big winner on that album when you have You May Be Right. Like, to me, that's the better song. Yeah,
I think that's the problem. And he talks a bit about that. If you've never listened to the song The Entertainer, that song basically sums up his entire frustration with the music industry, because it basically talks about his hit songs, but you got to make it fit. So cut it down to 305, because it basically talks about, some of these longer songs, like You May Be Right was 415, All for Lena 415. Those songs might not have gotten a radio airplay at that time, because at that point they were wanting those 3-minute songs. And of course, you look, Don't Ask Me Why is 259. It's Still Rock and Roll to Me is 257. You get the feeling of his frustration once he's kind of made it. It's like how I can write this song, about being the entertainer and about how you sing and dance for the label and you play by the rules and do all those sorts of things. And I think kind of told you about what that time was like in pop music, where you had to conform to get your song on the radio. Otherwise, you just didn't make it. And so many other great artists fell by the wayside because they weren't willing to conform.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny to me looking at it now that something that's 4 minutes and 15 seconds long is just too long. Like, no, we need to cut this thing down or it's not going to make the radio.
Yeah, it's totally bizarre, but it'll eventually get us talking about a band like Rush, who for so many years basically defied that radio trend. Like, you know what, we want to write this, 2112, and we don't care whether it gets on the radio or not. And, they finally kind of had that album break through that otherwise they were probably going to go away because they weren't radio friendly in that era where you had to be. Now, it doesn't really matter so much. That's kind of the point of this episode, is we can show you songs from everywhere and they work. But back then it was a totally different ball game. That's
the interesting thing about Rush too, is like, it's almost like they were wanting that validation of saying we can make it no matter what we create. And then you fast forward into the 80s where they start embracing synthesizers, and it's like, okay, fine, we made our point. Now let's start playing around with some of the more modern technology and different sounds. It was like they almost needed to be told, look, guys, just do whatever you want. We don't care. Clearly, you're going to make us money.
Right, exactly. And I would say it happened the same way for Billy Joel as he was getting into his stuff in the 80s. Eventually, they realized like he's just going to put out hits, and we're just going to leave him to do his thing. And he recently released a new song, which was the first time in, I don't remember how many years they said, and I have not checked that out. I'll have to check that out and report back and see what it sounds like. But I saw his concert, saw him New Year's Eve, 1999 at Madison Square Garden. It was still one of the best live shows I've seen. Definitely was great at the time. There was a lot of rumors about him retiring after that show. Crazy to think that he's still performing music in 2024, all these years later. But
it's crazy to think that the world ended right then.
It did.
I mean, that was Y2K. Like, nothing has been the same since.
In some ways, that's not very far off, as it turns out. But the good thing is music continues on. And as long as music continues on, we will be here each and every Monday to bring you the latest in music on Music Mondays. That's going to wrap things up for our first edition of Music Mondays. A big thanks to Mike, not only for being here, but also putting these lists together. That certainly makes this episode much better. We will link to his list on the YouTube version of this podcast, so make sure you check that out. A lot of interesting stuff on there from February 2nd. We'll see if maybe you find something a little different than what we found that fits your taste in music. A big thanks to Stove Leg Media for their continued support of the podcast. We will be back with you on Sunday as we will review the WWE Premium Live event coming from Perth, Australia, the Elimination Chamber. But that's going to wrap things up for this week in our first edition of Music Mondays. For the entire crew, I am Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.